On a freezing November morning in rural Montana, Lorna Greaves stood alone in her kitchen, staring at an empty refrigerator and 3 overdue bills pinned to the wall. Her husband, Corporal Matthias Greaves, had died 8 months earlier in a training accident overseas, and the life insurance never came. The military promised support, but promises had gone silent. Her 6-year-old son, Silas, hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days. What Lorna didn't know was that Matthias had saved the life of a man named Voss Carrick during their deployment in 2019. Voss never forgot. When word reached his motorcycle club, Iron Oath MC, that Matthias's widow was drowning in silence and shame, Voss made a single call. Within 4 hours, 85 bikers from 3 states rolled into the gravel driveway of her farmhouse, carrying bags of groceries, envelopes of cash, and something Lorna had forgotten existed: hope. But this wasn't charity. It was a promise kept. And when a corrupt county official tried to shut them down and seize the property for unpaid taxes, the bikers didn't back down. They stayed. They fought. And they reminded the world that some debts can never be repaid, only honored. This is the story of a widow who thought she was invisible, a brotherhood that rides for those who can't stand alone, and a little boy who learned that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the roar of engines at dawn. The refrigerator hummed in the silence, its door hanging open like a wound. Lorna Greaves stood in front of it, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. Inside, half a jar of pickles, a bottle of mustard, and a carton of milk 3 days past its expiration date. Nothing else. If you're hearing this story for the first time, take a moment to pause and reflect, because what happens next will remind you why promises matter and why some debts are paid not with money, but with loyalty. She closed the door softly, as if shutting it too hard might shatter what little control she had left. Behind her, the kitchen table was buried under unopened bills. Red letters, final notices, threats to disconnect the heat, the water, the electricity. The mortgage company had sent a certified letter last week. She hadn't opened it. Lorna was 34 years old, but she felt ancient. Her husband, Matthias, had been dead for 8 months, killed in a training accident overseas. The military said they'd take care of her. They said the insurance would come through. They said a lot of things. None of it happened. She walked to the window and looked out at the driveway. The truck Matthias had restored sat there, covered in dust. She hadn't driven it since the funeral. Couldn't. Every time she touched the door handle, she heard his voice. "This thing'll outlast us both, Lorna. It's built to endure." But Matthias hadn't endured, and neither was she. Upstairs, she could hear Silas stirring in his bed. 6 years old. Too young to understand why his father wasn't coming home, too old not to notice that something was deeply, terribly wrong. He'd stopped asking for seconds at dinner, stopped asking for toys, stopped asking for anything. Yesterday, he'd come home from school with a note from his teacher. "Silas seems withdrawn. Is everything okay at home?" Lorna had crumpled the note and thrown it away. Everything was not okay. She moved to the counter and picked up her phone. 3 missed calls from her mother, 2 texts from a creditor, 1 voicemail from the county tax office, polite but firm, reminding her that if she didn't pay by the end of the week, they'd begin seizure proceedings. She set the phone down and pressed her palms flat against the counter, steadying herself. She'd sold everything she could: the wedding china, Matthias's tools, her grandmother's ring. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. She didn't know what to do anymore. And then faintly from somewhere far off, she heard it, the low rumble of engines. At first, she thought it was thunder, but the sound didn't fade. It grew louder, closer, a deep, guttural roar that shook the windows. Lorna walked to the front door and opened it. The driveway was full, motorcycles, dozens of them. More rolling in from the main road, kicking up gravel and dust in the pale morning light. Men in leather vests, their patches worn and weathered, dismounting with military precision. Women, too, climbing off bikes with shopping bags in their hands. Lorna stood frozen. At the head of the convoy, a man with silver hair and a scar down his jaw cut the engine of his bike and removed his helmet. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes sharp and unyielding. He looked at her with the kind of gaze that didn't need explanation. He walked toward her, boots crunching on gravel. "Lorna Greaves." His voice was low, steady. She nodded, unable to speak. "Name's Voss Carrick, Iron Oath MC. Your husband saved my life in Kandahar, 2019. I owe him a debt." He glanced back at the convoy behind him. "We all do." Lorna's throat tightened. I don't understand." Voss stepped closer. "You don't have to. We're here to make sure you and your boy are taken care of. That's what Matthias would have done for any of us." Behind him, bikers were already unloading bags from saddlebags and trucks. Groceries, cases of water, boxes of canned goods. One woman carried a winter coat small enough for a child. Lorna's knees buckled. Voss caught her by the elbow, steadying her. "We're not leaving," he said quietly. "Not until you're back on your feet." Tears blurred her vision. She didn't know these people, didn't know their names, their stories, their faces, but they were here, and for the first time in 8 months, Lorna Greaves felt something she thought she'd lost forever. Hope. Voss Carrick had seen a lot of things in his life. War, loss, brotherhood forged in blood and fire. But the look on Lorna Greaves' face when she opened that door, the hollow, desperate exhaustion of someone who'd been drowning in silence, that was something different. That was a look he knew too well. He turned to his crew. "Unload everything. Food goes in the kitchen. Cash goes in an envelope on the table. No questions, no grandstanding. We do this clean." The bikers moved with purpose, spreading out across the property. Some carried bags of groceries. Others hauled cases of bottled water and dry goods. A few walked the perimeter, checking the house for structural damage, broken fences, anything that needed fixing. Lorna stood on the porch, trembling. I can't pay you back." Voss looked at her. "We're not here for payment. We're here because your husband kept a promise." She blinked, confused. "What promise?" Voss motioned for her to sit on the porch steps. She did slowly, as if her legs might give out. He sat beside her, his voice low and measured. "Kandahar, summer of 2019. Our convoy hit an IED on the outskirts of the city. My Humvee flipped, fire everywhere. I was trapped inside, unconscious. Your husband pulled me out, dislocated his shoulder doing it, refused medical evac until I was stable." Voss's jaw tightened. "He saved my life." Lorna's breath hitched. Matthias had never told her that story. After we got back stateside, I asked him what I could do to repay him. He said, "If anything ever happens to me, make sure my family's okay." I told him nothing was gonna happen. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Just promise me, Voss." Voss paused. "So I did." Lorna's hands covered her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "When I heard you were struggling, that the insurance hadn't come through, that the military left you hanging, I made some calls. Turned out a lot of us owed Matthias something, a favor, a second chance, a life." Voss gestured to the convoy. "So we came." One of the bikers, a woman with short red hair and a tattoo of a phoenix on her forearm, approached with a little boy in tow, Silas. He looked small in his oversized jacket, his eyes wide and uncertain. "Found him upstairs," the woman said gently. "Thought he might want to see what's going on." Silas clung to his mother's leg. Lorna wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. Voss crouched down to Silas's level. "Hey, kid, your dad was a hero. Did you know that?" Silas shook his head. "Well, he was, and heroes look out for their brothers. That's what we're doing here, looking out for you and your mom." Voss pulled a small patch from his vest, a silver eagle with the words Iron Oath stitched beneath it. He handed it to Silas. "This is for you. Keep it safe. It means your family." Silas took the patch carefully. his small fingers tracing the embroidery. Behind them, the sound of groceries being unloaded filled the air. The bikers worked in silence, efficient and respectful. No one asked questions. No one made a show of it. They just did the work. Inside the house, another biker, a man with a graying beard and kind eyes, was organizing the kitchen. He placed boxes of cereal on the counter, stacked canned vegetables in the pantry, filled the fridge with milk, eggs, cheese, and fresh vegetables. On the table, he set down an envelope. Lorna walked inside and saw it. Her name was written on the front in careful handwriting. She opened it slowly. Inside, $8 in cash. Her knees buckled again. Voss caught her. "That's from all of us," he said. "It'll cover your mortgage for a few months, give you time to breathe." Lorna couldn't speak. She couldn't process what was happening. 8 months of silence, of shame, of starvation. And in one morning, everything had changed. "Why?" she whispered. Voss's voice was firm. "Because your husband kept his promises, and so do we." By midday, the house was transformed. The kitchen was stocked. The heat was back on. The driveway had been cleared of debris. 2 bikers were on the roof, patching a leak Lorna hadn't even known was there. Silas sat on the porch with a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, the first real meal he'd had in days. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, while Voss sat beside him, telling him stories about his father. "Your dad was fearless," Voss said, "but he wasn't reckless. He thought before he acted, always made sure his brothers made it home." Silas looked up. "Did you know my dad a long time? Not as long as I should have, but long enough to know he was the kind of man you'd follow into hell and back." Silas smiled for the first time in months. Inside, Lorna sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope of cash. She'd never held this much money in her life. It felt surreal, impossible, like if she blinked it would disappear. One of the bikers, a woman named Reese with kind eyes and a gentle voice, sat across from her. "You okay?" Reese asked. Lorna nodded, though the tears hadn't stopped. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to. This is what we do. We take care of our own. But I'm not part of your club." "Doesn't matter. Matthias was, and that makes you family." Lorna wiped her eyes. "The military said they'd help. They said the insurance would come through, but it's been 8 months and I've heard nothing. No calls, no updates, just silence." Reese's expression darkened. "That's not right. Someone needs to answer for that." Before Lorna could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. The room went still. Voss stood slowly, his eyes narrowing. He motioned for 2 bikers to follow him. They moved to the door in silence. Voss opened it. Standing on the porch was a man in a cheap suit, holding a briefcase. Behind him, a county sheriff's cruiser sat in the driveway. "Lorna Greaves," the man said, his voice clipped and officious. Voss stepped between him and the door. "Who's asking?" The man frowned. "I'm Gerald Finch, county tax assessor. I'm here to serve notice of property seizure due to unpaid taxes." Voss didn't move. "She's got time to pay." "Not according to our records. The deadline was last Friday." "Then your records are wrong." Finch's jaw tightened. "Step aside, sir. This is official county business." Voss crossed his arms. "And this is private property. You've got no warrant, no court order, and no right to be here." Behind Finch, the sheriff, a heavy-set man with a nervous expression, shifted uncomfortably. Lorna appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "What's going on?" Finch ignored her and addressed Voss. "If you don't move, I'll have the sheriff remove you." Voss's smile was cold. "Go ahead, try." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Mr. Finch, maybe we should do your job." "Sheriff." But the sheriff didn't move. His eyes scanned the driveway, taking in the 85 bikers standing in formation, arms crossed, watching in silence. Finch's confidence faltered. Voss leaned in. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk back to your car, drive back to your office, and check your records again. Because if you try to take this woman's home, you're going to find out just how many people are willing to stand in your way." Finch's face reddened. "This isn't over." "No," Voss said quietly. "It's just beginning. And now I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you." Gerald Finch drove back to the county offices in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The sheriff followed in his cruiser, equally quiet. Neither man spoke about what they'd just witnessed. 85 bikers, all watching, all waiting. Finch had dealt with difficult cases before, foreclosures, seizures, evictions, but this was different. This wasn't just a grieving widow behind on her taxes. This was a woman with an army at her back. He pulled into the parking lot and slammed the car door behind him. Inside the office, his assistant looked up. "How'd it go?" "It didn't," Finch muttered. "Get me the Greaves file, now." She hesitated. "The Greaves file?" "Yes. The tax delinquency case. Widow, farmhouse on Route 47. The assistant turned to her computer and typed. Her face went pale. "Mr. Finch, there's no file." "What do you mean there's no file?" "I mean it's been deleted, wiped from the system." Finch's stomach dropped. "That's impossible. I'm looking at it right now, or not looking at it. It's gone." Finch grabbed the phone and dialed the records office. No answer. He dialed again. Still nothing. Something was very, very wrong. Back at the farmhouse, Voss stood in the kitchen with Lorna, explaining what had just happened. "They tried to seize your property," he said. "Claimed you missed the tax deadline." Lorna's face went white. "I did. I couldn't afford it. I've been trying to set up a payment plan, but no one would return my calls." Voss's jaw tightened. "That's not how the law works. You get notices, extensions, appeals. They can't just show up and take your house." "But that man said—" "That man's a bureaucrat trying to scare you, and he's got no power here." One of the bikers, a tech-savvy younger man named Nico, walked in holding a laptop. "Voss, I pulled the county tax records. You need to see this." Voss leaned over the screen. Nico pointed to a series of entries. "Lorna's property was flagged for seizure 3 months ago. But here's the thing, the taxes were paid, in full, by Matthias before he died. The payment cleared, but someone manually overrode the system and marked it as delinquent." Lorna's breath caught. "What?" "Someone's been targeting you," Nico said, "and they've been covering their tracks." Voss's eyes darkened. "Who?" Nico scrolled through the logs. The override came from an internal county account. "Looks like Gerald Finch." Lorna's hands trembled. "Why would he do that?" Voss straightened. "Because someone wants your land, and Finch is helping them get it." Lorna sank into a chair. "Matthias always said someone had been trying to buy this property, a developer. But Matthias refused. He said this land was our future." Voss's voice was ice. "Then that developer's been waiting for an opportunity. And when Matthias died, they saw one." Reese leaned against the counter. "So what do we do?" Voss's smile was sharp. "We make sure Finch knows he picked the wrong fight." That evening, Voss made a call. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Iron Oath MC, what do you need?" "It's Voss. I need a favor, legal favor, clean by the book." "Talk to me." "Widow of a vet being targeted by a corrupt county official trying to seize her property. We've got proof. Need someone who can file an injunction and start an investigation." There was a pause. "I know someone, former JAG officer. He owes me. I'll have him call you within the hour." "Appreciated." "Voss?" "Yeah? You riding for this one?" Voss glanced through the window at Lorna, who was sitting on the porch with Silas, holding him close. "All the way." Gerald Finch wasn't a bad man, At least, that's what he told himself every morning when he looked in the mirror. He was just practical. He understood how the world worked. Money moved things. Power opened doors. And if you wanted to survive in a system that chewed people up and spat them out, you had to play the game. But tonight, sitting in his office with the lights off and a glass of whiskey in his hand, he wasn't so sure anymore. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Marcus Wendell, the developer. Finch let it ring 3 times before answering. "It's done," Finch said. "Is it?" Wendell's voice was smooth, practiced. "Because I heard there were some complications. Nothing I can't handle. Gerald, I don't pay you to handle complications. I pay you to make problems disappear." Finch's jaw tightened. "There were bikers, a lot of them. They're protecting her. So what? Call the police, have them removed." "It's not that simple." "Then make it simple." "I want that land, Gerald. I've already got investors lined up. If this falls through, I lose millions. And if I lose, you lose." Finch swallowed. "I'll figure it out. You have 48 hours. The line went dead. Finch set the phone down and drained his glass. The next morning, Voss received a call from the lawyer. "Name's Garrett Pike, former JAG. I reviewed the case. You were right. This is fraud, plain and simple. Finch manually altered the tax records to make it look like she was delinquent. I've filed an injunction to halt any seizure proceedings and opened a formal investigation into the county assessor's office." Voss leaned against his bike. "How long until we hear back?" 48 hours, maybe less. In the meantime, make sure she doesn't sign anything and doesn't leave the property. If they try to serve her again, call me immediately." "Understood. What about Finch?" Pike's voice hardened. "If the investigation confirms fraud, he's looking at criminal charges. And if there's a developer involved, they're going down too." "Good. Voss?" "Yeah? You're doing the right thing. This woman deserves justice." "She deserves more than that," Voss said quietly. "She deserves peace." By midday, word had spread through the town. The bikers weren't leaving. They'd set up a perimeter around the farmhouse, rotating shifts, keeping watch. Some of them had brought tents. Others slept in their trucks. They weren't flashy, they weren't loud, they were just there. And people noticed. The local diner buzzed with conversation. Some folks were wary, others were curious, a few were outright supportive. One waitress, a woman named Darla, who'd known Matthias from high school, walked out to the farmhouse that afternoon with a tray of sandwiches and coffee. "Heard you folks were keeping watch," she said, handing the tray to Reese. "Figured you could use some fuel." Reese smiled. "That's kind of you." Darla looked at the house. "Lorna's a good woman. Matthias was a good man. What's happening to her isn't right." "No," Reese agreed. "It's not." Darla hesitated. "If you need anything, food, supplies, whatever, you let me know." "We will." As Darla walked back to her car, Voss watched from the porch. The town was starting to wake up, starting to pay attention. That was good, because if Finch and Wendell thought they could intimidate Lorna Greaves into giving up her home, they were about to learn a very hard lesson. Some fights aren't won with money or power, they're won with loyalty. 48 hours later, Gerald Finch returned. This time, he brought backup. 3 county vehicles rolled into the driveway at dawn, kicking up dust and gravel. Finch stepped out, flanked by 2 deputies and a man in an expensive suit, Marcus Wendell, the developer. Voss was already waiting. The bikers stood in formation behind him, silent and unmoving. 85 engines idling, 85 pairs of eyes locked on the intruders. Finch held up a folder. "I've got a court order. Mrs. Greaves has 24 hours to vacate the premises." Voss took the folder and scanned the document. His expression didn't change. "This is fake," he said flatly. Finch's face reddened. "Excuse me?" "This document was filed yesterday at 4:47 p.m., but according to the county clerk's office, the court's closed at 4:30. And the judge who supposedly signed this, he's been on medical leave for 2 weeks. Voss handed the folder back. So either you forged this, or someone forged it for you. Either way, it's not legal. Wendell stepped forward. This is harassment. You have no authority here. Voss turned to him. And you have no right to this land. But here you are anyway. Wendell's smile was cold. I'm a businessman, Mr. Carrick. I don't make threats. I make deals. So here's mine. Mrs. Greaves can sell me this property for a fair price and walk away with enough money to start over, or she can fight this in court for years and lose everything. Voss stepped closer. Or option 3, you leave, now, before you find out what happens when you threaten a brother's family. Wendell didn't flinch. I've dealt with men like you before. Tough talk, no follow-through. And you haven't met men like us. Behind Voss, the bikers revved their engines in unison. The sound was deafening. The deputies shifted nervously. Wendell's jaw tightened. This isn't over. No, Voss said quietly. It's not. Wendell turned and walked back to his car. Finch followed, his face pale. The convoy pulled out, leaving a trail of dust in their wake. Reese walked up beside Voss. They'll be back. I know. And next time they'll bring more than deputies. Voss's eyes didn't leave the road. Then we'll be ready. If you've made it this far, take a moment to hit the like button. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And trust us, you're going to want to see how this ends. That night, Lorna couldn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen at 2:47 a.m., staring at the envelope of cash still sitting on the table. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. The same refrigerator that had been empty just days ago. Now it was full. Milk, eggs, fresh vegetables, cheese, bread. Things she'd stopped dreaming about. But the weight in her chest hadn't lifted. Voss knocked softly on the doorframe, his boots barely making a sound on the old hardwood. Mind if I come in? She nodded, wrapping her hands around a cold mug of coffee she hadn't touched. He sat across from her, his leather vest creaking as he settled into the chair. The kitchen light cast shadows across his scarred face, making him look older, wearier, but his eyes were sharp, alert. The eyes of a man who'd seen too much but refused to look away. You okay? His voice was low, careful. I don't know, she admitted, her voice cracking. Part of me wants to just sell, take the money, start over somewhere else, somewhere without memories. Somewhere that doesn't remind me of everything I lost. She swallowed hard. But this is Matthias's land. She nodded, tears welling up and spilling over. He loved this place. He spent years fixing it up. Every weekend he was out there, repairing the fence, patching the roof, planting trees. He always talked about how Silas would grow up here, how we'd build a life, how this place would be ours forever. Her voice cracked, and now it feels like I'm failing him, like I'm letting him down. Voss leaned forward, his elbows on the table. You're not failing anyone, Lorna. You're surviving, and that's harder than it sounds. Matthias knew that. He knew what it takes to keep going when everything inside you is screaming to give up. But what if I can't keep it? What if they take it anyway? What if all of this, everything you've done, isn't enough? It will be enough, because we're not done fighting. How can you be so sure? Voss's voice was steady, unshakable. Because I made Matthias a promise, and I don't break my promises. Ever. Lorna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. You don't owe me anything. No, Voss said slowly. But I knew Matthias, and I know what kind of man he was. The kind who'd ride into hell for his brothers, the kind who'd give everything, his time, his body, his life, to protect his family. The kind of man who kept his word no matter what it cost him. He paused, his jaw tightening. You're part of that family, which makes you part of ours, and we don't abandon family." Lorna's hands trembled. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me. Just keep fighting for Silas, for Matthias, for yourself. Don't let them erase what he built. Don't let them win." She nodded, a fragile but growing strength returning to her eyes. "I won't. I promise." Voss reached across the table and squeezed her hand once. "That's all Matthias ever asked. Just don't give up." Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The bikers were stirring, starting their engines for the morning watch rotation. The sound was comforting now, a reminder that she wasn't alone. For the first time in months, Lorna felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The next morning, Garrett Pike called with news that would change everything. Voss answered on the second ring, stepping away from the porch where the bikers were sharing coffee and breakfast sandwiches that Darla had dropped off an hour earlier. "Talk to me," Voss said. Pike's voice was sharp with satisfaction. "The investigation's complete. We've got him. Finch altered the tax records manually. We've got digital fingerprints, timestamps, server logs, everything. He accessed the system at 11:34 p.m. on August 19th and changed Lorna's status from paid in full to delinquent. Then he backdated the notice to make it look like she'd been warned." Voss's jaw tightened. "So he was targeting her from the start." "Absolutely, and it gets better. We found emails between Finch and Marcus Wendell going back 6 months. Wendell was paying Finch $5,000 a month to facilitate the seizure. They planned this. What are the charges? Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit theft, abuse of public office? He's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. The DA's filing charges today. Finch will be in custody by noon." Voss exhaled slowly. "And Wendell? Harder to prove direct criminal involvement, but we're working on it. If Finch flips, and he will, they always do, Wendell's going down too. At minimum, he's facing civil lawsuits, loss of business licenses, and permanent damage to his reputation. His development company's already hemorrhaging investors." "Good. What about Lorna's situation?" Pike's tone softened. "The injunction's permanent. Her property is protected. The county's dropping all claims, and there's something else." He paused. "We looked into Matthias's life insurance. Turns out the claim was never processed. It was flagged as incomplete paperwork 8 months ago and buried in the system. Someone at the insurance company marked it low priority and forgot about it." Voss's voice went cold. "They left her to starve because of paperwork. Welcome to bureaucracy, but we're fixing it. I've reopened the case with the insurance company. I threatened legal action for bad faith denial. They folded immediately. Lorna should see that money, $250,000, within 60 days. Voss closed his eyes. $250,000, enough to save the house. Enough to give Silas a future, enough to honor Matthias's sacrifice. "Pike, yeah? Thank you. Don't thank me. You're the one who made this happen. Tell her she's got a hell of a guardian angel." Voss glanced through the window at Lorna, who was sitting on the porch with Silas, reading him a story. The morning light caught her face, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked peaceful. "She's got more than that," Voss said quietly. "She's got family." When he hung up, he walked back to the porch and told Lorna everything. She listened in silence, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. When he finished, she couldn't speak. She just nodded over and over, her body shaking with relief. Silas looked up at his mother. "Mama, are we okay now?" Lorna pulled him into her arms and held him tight. "Yes, baby, we're okay. We're going to be okay." Voss turned away, giving them privacy. But as he walked back toward his bike, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride. 3 days later, the county sheriff arrived at dawn. But this time, he wasn't there to serve papers or enforce corrupt orders. He came alone, his cruiser rolling slowly up the gravel driveway, kicking up dust that glowed gold in the early light. The bikers watched him carefully, hands resting on their belts, ready for anything. The sheriff parked and stepped out. He was an older man, late 50s, with a weathered face and grey temples. He'd been sheriff for 20 years. He'd seen good days and bad. But the weight he carried now was different. This was the weight of shame. He walked up to the porch slowly, his hat in his hands, and knocked. Lorna opened the door, cautious, her body tense. Silas stood behind her, peering around her legs. "Mrs. Greaves," the sheriff said, his voice heavy, "I came to apologize." Lorna blinked, not understanding. "Apologize? For what happened? For what I almost did?" He looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. "Gerald Finch lied to me. Told me you were delinquent on your taxes. Told me the seizure was legal and proper. Showed me documents that looked official. I should have checked the records myself. I should have questioned him, but I didn't. And that's on me." Lorna's throat tightened. "Sheriff, I've been doing this job for 2 decades. I've always believed in the law, in doing things the right way. But I let Finch manipulate me. I let him use my office to hurt you and your boy." His voice cracked. "And for that, I'm truly sorry." Lorna didn't know what to say. The anger she'd felt, the betrayal, the fear, suddenly felt complicated, tangled with something softer. The sheriff continued, his voice steadier now. "Gerald Finch was arrested this morning. Federal marshals took him into custody. He's being charged with fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and abuse of public office. The DA says he's looking at 10 to 15 years minimum in federal prison." Lorna's breath hitched. "And Marcus Wendell? He's being investigated by the FBI for bribery, fraud, and racketeering. His development company's under audit. His investors are pulling out. His permits have been revoked. The man's finished." The sheriff's eyes met hers. "And your property, it's yours. Free and clear. The injunction's been lifted. All claims against your land have been dropped. You're safe." Tears spilled down Lorna's cheeks. "So, I can keep my home?" "Yes, ma'am. No one's taking it from you. Not now. Not ever." Her knees buckled slightly. Voss, who'd been standing in the doorway behind her, steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. The sheriff glanced at Voss, then back at Lorna. "You've got good people looking out for you, Mrs. Greaves. Real good people. The kind who don't quit. The kind who don't back down." He placed his hat back on his head. "Your husband would be proud." Lorna's voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you, Sheriff." He nodded once respectfully and walked back to his cruiser. As he drove away, the morning sun broke over the ridge, flooding the valley with light. When the sound of the engine faded completely, Lorna turned to Voss, her voice breaking. "It's over? It's over!" She collapsed into his arms, sobbing, not from grief this time, but from relief. 8 months of fear, of hunger, of humiliation and desperation. It was over, finally over. Voss held her steady, letting her cry until there were no tears left. Silas tugged on his vest. "Mr. Voss, does this mean we get to stay?" Voss knelt down to the boy's level. "Yeah, kid, you get to stay. This is your home. Always will be." Silas smiled, the biggest, brightest smile Voss had seen from him, and threw his arms around Voss's neck. And in that moment, Voss understood why Matthias had fought so hard for this place. It wasn't about the land. It wasn't about the house. It was about belonging, about roots, about having something worth protecting. That evening, the bikers gathered in the driveway one last time. 85 motorcycles lined up in formation, their chrome gleaming in the fading light. The engines were silent now. The work was done, but no one was in a hurry to leave. Voss stood on the porch, looking out at the men and women who'd ridden hundreds of miles, who'd given up days of their lives, who'd stood watch in the cold and the rain to protect a widow they'd never met. "We came here to honor a promise," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, "to make sure Matthias Greaves' family was taken care of, that his sacrifice wasn't forgotten, that his widow and his son didn't stand alone." He paused. "And we did that. We won." The bikers nodded, some smiling, others solemn. "But this isn't just about one widow," Voss continued, his voice hardening. "It's about standing up when the system fails. It's about being the family people need when blood won't show up. It's about keeping promises when no one else will." He looked at each face. Reese with her phoenix tattoo, Nico with his laptop, the old-timers who'd ridden with him for decades, the younger members who were still learning what it meant to be part of something bigger than themselves. "Lorna and Silas are safe. The house is theirs. The fight's over." Voss's voice dropped lower, more intense. "But there are others out there like her. Others who've been forgotten. Others who've been crushed by corrupt officials and greedy developers. Others who need someone to stand beside them when the world turns its back." He straightened. "So we ride, and we keep riding, until no one stands alone." The bikers revved their engines in unison. The sound was deafening, a roar of solidarity that echoed across the valley and into the mountains beyond. One by one they pulled out, their headlights cutting through the dusk. Lorna stood on the porch with Silas waving, tears streaming down her face. Each bike that passed honked or raised a fist in farewell. Voss was the last to leave. He stopped his bike at the edge of the driveway, one boot on the ground, and looked back at her. "You ever need us," he said over the rumble of his engine. "You call. Doesn't matter when. Doesn't matter why. We'll come." Lorna nodded, her voice breaking. "Thank you, Voss, for everything." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "That's what family does." And then he kicked his bike into gear and rode into the sunset, his silhouette fading into the golden light. Lorna watched until the last sound of engines disappeared. Then she turned to Silas, took his hand, and walked back inside. Home. 6 months later, spring came to Montana. Lorna Greaves stood in her kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows, preparing dinner. The fridge was full, overflowing even, with fresh vegetables from the farmer's market, milk, eggs, cheese, and leftovers from the weekend. The bills on the counter were stamped "paid in full." The mortgage was current. The heat worked. The roof no longer leaked. Everything was different. Everything was right. Outside, Silas was playing in the yard, his laughter echoing through the open window as he chased fireflies in the tall grass. He looked healthy now, strong. His cheeks had color. His eyes had light. He was a different child than the hollow-eyed boy who'd gone days without eating. On the wall above the kitchen table, Lorna had hung a photograph, Matthias in his uniform, smiling, his arm around Voss Carrick. The picture had been taken in Kandahar just weeks before Matthias pulled Voss from that burning Humvee. 2 brothers, 2 warriors, 1 promise. Beside it, carefully framed behind glass, was the patch Voss had given Silas, the silver eagle with iron oath stitched beneath it. Lorna had taken it to a frame shop and had it mounted with Matthias's dog tags. It hung there like a shrine, a reminder. Lorna had also done something else, something that felt right, something that honored Matthias in a way that went beyond memory. She'd started a fund. It began small, just a page on a fundraising website and a few posts on social media. She called it the Matthias Greaves Memorial Fund, and its mission was simple: to help military families who'd been left behind by the system. Families dealing with delayed insurance claims, families facing foreclosure, families drowning in bills while waiting for benefits that never came. The bikers had helped her set it up. Reese had designed the logo. Nico had built the website. Voss had made calls to veterans organizations, spreading the word. Within 3 weeks, the fund had raised $40, euro dollars. Within 3 months, it had reached 6 figures. Donations poured in from across the country, veterans, civilians, motorcycle clubs, churches, strangers who'd heard the story and wanted to help. The fund paid rent for a family in Ohio, covered funeral expenses for a widow in Texas, bought groceries for a single mother in Georgia whose husband had died in Afghanistan and whose benefits were tied up in red tape. Every dollar went directly to families in need. No overhead, no salaries, just help. Lorna managed it from her kitchen table, fielding emails and applications, connecting families with resources, making sure no one fell through the cracks the way she almost had. It was exhausting. It was overwhelming. But it was also the most meaningful thing she'd ever done. One evening in late spring, Lorna received a letter in the mail. No return address, just her name, handwritten in clean block letters. Inside was a single note on plain paper. You honored him by staying, by fighting, by not giving up. That's the legacy he left you. And now you're passing it on. That's what real honor looks like. Keep going. You're changing lives. V. Lorna folded the letter carefully and placed it in the frame beside the photograph and the patch. She stood there for a long moment, staring at Matthias's face. I'm trying, she whispered. I'm trying to make you proud. And somehow she felt like he heard her. Silas grew up on that land. He learned to ride a bike on the gravel driveway, his mother running alongside him, laughing when he wobbled and cheering when he finally found his balance. He learned to fish in the creek behind the house, catching trout with his bare hands the way his father had taught the local kids when he was alive. He learned to fix fences and patch roofs and plant trees. And every year, on the anniversary of his father's death, a convoy of motorcycles rolled into the driveway, not to grieve, not to mourn, but to celebrate, to remember, to honor a promise kept. The bikers brought food, stories, and laughter. They told Silas about his father's courage, his loyalty, his unshakable integrity. They taught him how to change a tire, how to read a map, how to stand tall when the world tried to knock you down. Voss always came, every year, without fail, and every year he sat with Silas on the porch and told him the same thing. Your father was the best man I ever knew, and if you grow up to be half the man he was, the world will be a better place. Years later, when Silas was 17, he asked his mother about the bikers. They were sitting on the porch at sunset, watching the convoy arrive for the annual gathering. 85 bikes, maybe more. The numbers had grown over the years. Who were they, Mom? Silas asked. Really, I mean, why did they come? What did they owe, Dad? Lorna smiled, her eyes distant but warm. They were family. But we don't know them, not really. Family isn't always about blood, Silas. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when you need them most, the people who keep their promises, the people who stand beside you when everyone else walks away. She pointed to the patch on the wall inside. Your father saved a man's life, and that man never forgot. He came back for us when we had nothing, and that's what real honor looks like. Silas stared at the patch for a long time, the silver eagle gleaming in the fading light. I want to be like that, he said quietly. Lorna pulled him close, her arm around his shoulders. Then be the kind of person who keeps their promises. Be the kind of person who stands up for others when they can't stand up for themselves. Be the kind of person your father was. Silas nodded slowly. I will, I promise. And in that moment, Lorna knew Matthias's legacy wasn't just the land. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't even the fund. It was the lesson that loyalty matters, that promises are sacred, that family is something you choose, something you build, something you fight for with everything you have, and that no one stands alone. Not when there are people willing to ride through the night, to stand in the rain, to fight battles that aren't their own, simply because someone once kept a promise to them. That was the legacy. and it would live on long after all of them were gone. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, please consider subscribing to this channel and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. These stories are about more than just survival. They're about the strength we find when we stand together, the promises we keep when no one's watching, and the families we build when blood isn't enough. Until next time, ride safe, keep your promises, and never forget, some debts can only be paid with loyalty.